All right, let's spin it forward to the final game of this round. That would be the Sugar Bowl, which pits number 7 Notre Dame against number 2 Georgia. That takes place on January 1st at 8:45 in the evening on the East Coast on ESPN. Of course, that game is in New Orleans, Louisiana, in the Superdome. Georgia at the present is a 2-point favorite. Notre Dame has never beaten Georgia. Georgia leads the all-time series 3-0. So, Brian, how do the Bulldogs get to the Sugar Bowl?
Well, guys, they're a lot like Ohio State, right? This is what they were supposed to do. This is where they were supposed to be. Coming into the season, you expected Georgia to be one of those teams. We heard all last year, if Georgia would have made the playoffs last year, they'd have beat Michigan and all these other type of things. Who knows? Maybe they would have, maybe they wouldn't have. But you also came into the season saying, guys, could the schedule be too much could it be the thing that keeps them from getting to that point? That was an honest question. That was a fair question. Could that be the thing that keeps them from getting to it? And guys, it almost did, but I think the schedule allowed them to be challenged in a way from start to finish in a way that nobody else was. And that's what's got them here. You start the season off, guys, with a neutral field win over Clemson. It was 6-0 at halftime. And then Georgia took that game over in the second half. You have an ugly win 2 weeks later over Kentucky, but they did grind it out. And then you started to see some of the chinks in the armor a little bit, fellas. They have a bye week, go into Bama with a bye, had a bye, and Bama jumps out to a 28-0 lead. But then you see the chinks in the armor, but then you also saw something in that game that showed why Georgia is still playing and Alabama is not. Because even though they fell behind 28-0 and were getting dominated, that team never quit. Never quit. They kept fighting. They kept battling, and that's going to be a theme all year, fellas. Same thing against Kentucky. We saw them lose that game late. Again, shaky pass secondary cost them that game, but they took a late fourth quarter lead in a game they were behind to Bama by 4 touchdowns. Ugly win over Auburn, ugly win over Mississippi State, and then a dominant win over Texas on the road. Ugly win over Florida. They then got dominated by Ole Miss. They lost 28-10. Now, their defense did force Ole Miss to settle for a lot of field goals in that game, which helped them. But the only touchdown that Georgia had in that game, Vince, was first drive of the game. They pick Ole Miss off and run it back, and they score on a short field. And they still had to kind of work to get that one and really never truly threatened Ole Miss again the rest of the game. And then what do? They bounce back the next week. It's tied 17-17 against Tennessee. And in the second half of that game, they absolutely dominated Tennessee. Sloppy win over UMass, but still won by 30. There's a lot of teams that would love to have sloppy 38-point wins. And then the Georgia Tech game comes, and it's more of the same. You see the chinks in the armor. They're vulnerable to teams who can get to the perimeter. This is not as fast of a Georgia defense as we've seen in past years, especially on the third level. You have a team that is vulnerable to being run at by good running attacks, a team that struggles with mobile quarterbacks, in my opinion, in that game. And they fall behind 17-0. And we can talk all we want about how the refs helped Georgia out, and they did. But they also still had to come back from a 17-0 deficit and make the plays needed to get back in it and come back and win that game in 8 overtimes. And then we see the same thing against Texas. They're down 9-3 at halftime. Thoroughly outplayed by Texas in the first half. Lose their starting quarterback on the last play of the first half. Come out the second half, and once again, this Georgia team has said, we are not going to quit. We're not going to stop fighting. Come back, win that game in overtime. The biggest takeaway from this Georgia team for me, guys, is no, this is not as dominant of a Georgia team as people thought it was going to be coming into the season. But the reason they're here now is because they have the heart of a champion. This team does not stop fighting. They don't. And that's why they're here. You could point to their schedule where they should have lost that game. They should have lost that game. But they didn't, because this team has no quit in them. And y'all know I'm not a big Kirby Smart fan in a lot of ways. But the one thing that I give him a ton of credit for is he has had this team ready to fight for 60 minutes every single time they take the field. They don't always play well, but they battle, they fight. And that's, to me, why they're here and why they're on this stage where they've got a chance to once again go play for national championships. So that's how Georgia got here, fellas.
Yeah, man. I mean, this is a fun narrative again between two teams that have had to continually battle and battle and battle. Just for Notre Dame, it's looked a little different. For some of our avid listeners out there, you guys know the story. Notre Dame starts out hot. They go down into the daunted SEC country where just nobody else besides the SEC can win. And they go into Kyle Field and beat Texas A&M by 10 points, and they were 3-point dogs before kickoff, right? And that's when all the noise started creeping in. That's when it was, Notre Dame is the favorite now to make the playoffs, and then they might go undefeated. And what have we learned throughout this season? We learned throughout the season that teams have struggled handling success. It happened to Notre Dame. It happened to Alabama. It happened to Miami. It happened with countless teams.
Georgia.
Yep, happened to Georgia. It happened to a lot of different teams. Now, I will say the different narrative is Notre Dame loses to Northern Illinois. They suck. They don't belong. The other teams as well, they just weren't able to handle success. It's a fluke. Another conversation for another show. But Notre Dame has been ascending ever since September 7th at 7:30 p.m. And that showed, and now they're winners of 11 straight games. 10 of those have been by double digits. So regardless of what people feel about Notre Dame, you can't deny just the football factor. If I remove the name from it, if I take Notre Dame Fighting Irish off of it, and I tell you that there's a team that has won 11 straight games, 10 of them by double digits. They've forced a minimum of one turnover in every game. And in that span of time, they're averaging over 40 points a game. You're not going to tell me that they suck and don't belong. You know what I'm saying? But that's where Notre Dame is at. They've had notable wins this season over Texas A&M, over Louisville, over Navy and Army. And I'm going to throw USC in there too because they're 2-0 this season against the SEC. So calling a spade, it is what it is.
SEC teams, by the way. Both 8-win SEC teams.
Yep. But with that being said, one of the reasons why they got here and one of the big reasons why they got here has been a handful of things. You can look at Riley Leonard's progression. And a lot of Notre Dame fans were counting out number 13 before their first bye. And to be honest, some of it was rightfully so. Once you start factoring in the fact that he missed spring and he might be not that healthy and the ankle might not be that good to go. He injured his shoulder.
Slide route.
That's what I'm saying. He can't. Yeah, all of these things, and he's shades of who he was against. When he was at Duke, but his progression has been huge. Obviously, you have to factor in the running backs' dominance. Notre Dame has the best running back duo in the country, and I would put up that argument against any team. That's not specific to Georgia. It's not specific to anybody that we've talked about today. But if you just look at the numbers and the defensive perseverance. We talked a lot about how Georgia has had to battle adversity on and off the field. Same thing with Notre Dame. Notre Dame has been playing in playoff elimination games since September 7th after that loss. And right now in those games, they're 11-0. And that's a team that is hot coming into the playoffs. However, it came with a lot of injuries. Brian kind of briefly touched on what that looked like for them. They're down Riley Mills, both of their starting Vipers, their All-American corner, their starting presumed left tackle going into the season. They have a who was probably going to be a true freshman All-American in Kingston Viliama-Asa, but he was injured to finish the season. And so they're down. They're down so many guys, and yet they're still here. And so the reason why I think this matchup in this game is going to be so awesome is because you have two teams who at any point in the season could have folded because they just kept being told that they shouldn't be here. They're not who everybody thought they were going to be. And here they are squaring off in the quarterfinals with a bid going to the semifinals at stake and a win in the Sugar Bowl on the line. So all of this is going to be really, really fun. I do think it's fitting that the first time that these teams played was in 1981 in the Sugar Bowl, and Georgia ended up winning 17-10. It was Dan Devine's last game. So there's a lot of different narratives that are going to be tossed around here, but I think it's going to be a lot of fun. These are two really physical football teams. I know we're about to dive into the matchup here in a second, but that's Notre Dame's journey to get here, man. I mean, there is so many times that this team could have folded and quit and hung in the towel, just like Georgia could have. Georgia could have done it down that much against Alabama. They could have done it down 17. They could have done it when Carson Beck was injured in the SEC championship game, and they never did.
While losing.
Yes.
They were down when he got hurt. Yeah.
So Georgia's an opponent where, albeit I have disagreements with their fans almost every day on Twitter. And like Brian, I'm not the biggest Kirby Smart supporter, but this team has my respect, man. They don't quit. They're a team that is they're going to play until there's double zeros on the clock. So this is going to be a really, really fun matchup to dive into, man.
All right, boys. So let's break this one down a little bit and kind of how we did the other 3 games. Storylines, matchups. We're not going to do a prediction on this game. We're going to have a special show.
And hold off on that until next week.
We will. Heart.
What do you guys think about us at least saying who we think is going to win? So that way we don't leave people hanging.
I think they got to tune into the next one, but that's me. So we're not going to make any specific predictions. I'll say that. And because we're going to do a whole show on that. But your overall thoughts on this game, some matchups that stick out to you, some storylines that stick out to you, that kind of thing. Brian, I'll let you go first.
Biggest storyline is from the Notre Dame standpoint, guys. It's okay. This is the kind of game you haven't been able to win for a very, very long time. Look, they've beaten some big time programs in the last decade. They've beaten Florida State. They've beaten Oklahoma. In the last 15 years, they've beaten LSU. They've beaten Clemson. They've beaten some of those teams. They've never beat them in years where those teams were elite. The year that they beat Clemson in 2022, that was not an elite Clemson team. The year that they every year they beat Florida State's been bad. They haven't, unfortunately, been able to play. Last time they played a good Florida State team was back in 2014, and they lost that football game. And that's a phenomenal game, went down to the wire. They played Georgia twice, and when Georgia was really good and lost both times. Both very competitive football games, lost both times. An L is an L, right? I know as much as the previous head coach tried to argue for the good loss narrative, this is Notre Dame. There are no good losses at Notre Dame, right? It's either you win or you lose. And so for Notre Dame, it's, okay, do you belong on the stage? Well, yeah, of course you belong. All right, cool. So you're here again, 4th time in the last 13 years, 14 years. But can you get over that hump? That's the biggest storyline. Can you get over that hump? The Indiana game was a huge win for Notre Dame, but it wasn't the monkey off your back scenario because A, it was at home, and B, it was Indiana. And here's the thing that frustrates me about this conversation with Indiana is you can say that's not a program-moving, needle-moving win and still say Indiana's a really good football team, and you beat a really good football team, but you were supposed to beat Indiana. This is the game that people don't know if you can win or not. And so that's the biggest storyline for me is Notre Dame goes into this game. Yes, they're beat up. Georgia's playing without their backup quarterback. So let's get the injury stuff out of the conversation now and then just talk about who can win this football game. And that's going to come down to it is what's the storyline? Because, again, we see it from one of our resident SEC fans in here that just no chance Notre Dame wins a game like this, right? And so, there's some national analysts and some Georgia analysts who I think understand this is a good football team for Notre Dame, but I still think they all expect Georgia to win this game because Notre Dame has not proven they can win this type of game. And that, to me, is the biggest storyline, guys, is until Notre Dame can win a game like this, that narrative exists. That's why I say, look, Bama and Georgia fans can talk all the trash they want about Notre Dame because they've beat Notre Dame. Ohio State fans can talk all the trash they want about Notre Dame because Notre Dame hasn't beaten those teams. I don't want to hear crap from LSU fans. I don't want to hear crap from Michigan fans or Penn State, teams that Notre Dame has beat. These are the teams that you haven't been able to beat. And until you can beat one of those teams, guys, then the narrative exists. It's going to remain. And so that's really the biggest thing at stake beyond a chance to go play in the college football semifinals, right? It's also that for Notre Dame, it's that narrative. And for Georgia, it's just keep on rolling. You're that team. You are the new dominant program in college football. You don't have to win it every year to be the dominant team in college football. And that's what they are. They are the dominant team in college football. And they are a championship contender. So this is the first chance. This is the most recent chance, guys, I would say, since Ohio State early last year. You could even maybe argue Ohio State 2022, whether you could debate whether or not Ohio State last year was actually a championship contender. I don't think that they were. I think you'd have to go back to 22 Ohio State with C.J. Stroud to say the last time you played a true that team can win it all, and you lost. Prior to that, it was going back to Bama in 2020. I don't think Cincinnati 2021 was a legit – they were a playoff team, but they weren't a title contender. Indiana's a legit playoff team. They're not a title contender. Georgia's both. And so for Notre Dame, the big storyline is, can you finally beat a team like that? Can this be your moment where they've all had them? Georgia had to beat Bama to get here. That was their kryptonite. When you think about Clemson to win theirs. They had to get their kryptonite was Florida State and South Carolina, and then it became Bama, right? And so they beat that real good Notre Dame team in 2015, which Dabo has always said is the game that kind of started that program's final ascent over the hump. And then, of course, the next year went out and beat Bama in the title game. So every team has had to have that moment. LSU in 2019 had to beat Bama. All those good LSU teams, the 11 team, they had some great teams. They could never beat Bama. And then the one year they did beat Bama in 11, they had to play them in a rematch, and they got smoked in the title game. And they had to beat Bama that year. And it was a great game, jumped on them big. Bama came back. LSU closed them out. That was your kryptonite. That was that dragon you had to slay. Can Notre Dame slay that dragon in this game? I think that's the without question the biggest storyline of this game, and I would argue the biggest storyline of the quarterfinals, even beyond the Ryan Day stuff. This, to me, is the potential for the biggest mountainous, seismic shift in college football if Notre Dame wins this game. If they lose this game, it's just kind of like, okay, the world is what it always has been.
Yep.
Notre Dame's good, but they're not that team. And Georgia is. So let's move on and let's go watch Georgia smash Penn State next week, right? Like that's what the storyline is going to be. If Notre Dame wins, there's a bit of a seismic shift that says, okay, we now have a new team stepping onto that elite. It doesn't mean Georgia's no longer an elite team. They still are. It just means Notre Dame has now ascended to those heights, in my opinion. And that's what's at stake for the Irish in this game. And for Georgia, it's you want to keep them from getting there because you know what happens on the recruiting trail if Notre Dame finally knocks that door down. I've saying this for years, guys. Teams in the South are scared to death of Notre Dame getting onto that stage and winning because they know what it means for Notre Dame's ability to go down south and start to get some of those guys that they finish second and third for all the time. Now you start getting some of those guys. And that's what 88 did for them. That's what Notre Dame has to prove now. And if you can't, then it's the same. The storyline exists. You're not that team. You're pretty good, but you're like you said it last week. You're one of the best tier 2 teams in college football, but you're not tier 1.
Yeah, I mean, Notre Dame's been knocking on the door for years, but this is it. This is the win that they can't just seem to get. And to me, I agree with everything that you said, so I'm not going to rehash it. The other storyline that I love in this one is the coaching matchup. We've been talking all show about the different coaching matchups that are going on. And right now you have, no pun intended, the top dog in Kirby Smart. And I mean, he's at the helm of a program that has won 2 of the 3 last national championships.
Yep.
Right. And last year were held out of the playoffs by their first loss in 30 games, And so this is it. Like Kirby Smart is the guy. And Marcus Freeman is at the top of the list of ascending head coaches in college football. He just ripped off his 12th ranked win in 3 years. Not a lot of coaches can say that, especially not a lot of coaches at Notre Dame, right? So to me, that's another really interesting storyline. Is it the young head coach, the exciting and energetic Marcus Freeman with probably the best coordinator duo in college football, at the very least one of, can he make it happen? Is he the guy? We're talking a lot about, is Dan Lanning the guy to get him over the hump in Oregon? Can Ryan Day finally eclipse that big game and make it back to the national championship like Urban could for Ohio State? I'm not quite yet on the train with that with Marcus Freeman, but we talk a lot about he's a great coach and we think he's the man for the job, but is he a championship caliber coach? And this is going to really be the first opportunity that we have at this stage, right? Because right now he's kind of batting over. He didn't do it in 22 against Ohio State. He didn't do it in 23 against Ohio State, and before that, he just wasn't the head coach. So that's going to be an interesting narrative going into this game. Like that's going to be another one because, Vince, you said it at the start of the show, there's one head coach in all of the playoffs right now that has experience playing in and or winning a national championship. Can Marcus Freeman add his name to that slate?
As a head coach.
Yeah, as a head coach. Like, can he add his name to that very short list of names? And that's going to be another thing. And on the flip side, can Kirby Smart kind of hold that off? Can he kind of be the next gatekeeper in line to keep Notre Dame out of that elite ring of teams? It's going to be a fun one to watch, man. It's going to be fun to watch.
You guys could hear it a little bit in Kirby Smart's comments leading up to the game, you could see that there's a level of respect that he has for Marcus Freeman in this program. And you, because he talked about, I don't really remember those games a whole lot, and he probably doesn't remember those games a whole lot from a standpoint of like the play by play. I mean, they were 2019, 2017, but what I promise you he remembers is those were games where they were battles in the trenches. And at the end of the day, Georgia won those battles. And they were games where Georgia's quarterbacks made more plays in the fourth quarter than Notre Dame's quarterbacks made in the fourth quarter. And that's what this game's going to be about. At the end of the day, guys, Notre Dame's got to prove that they have a quarterback capable of making those game-winning plays. Notre Dame, in each of those two games that they lost, Notre Dame had the football in the fourth quarter with less than 3 minutes to play, where either a field goal in 2017 or a touchdown puts you ahead and wins you the game. And in both times, they never threatened to score in those two games. And part of it wasn't just Notre Dame's failures, but Georgia's defensive players stepped up and made the plays. Jake Fromm in each of those games stepped up in the fourth quarter and made big-time throws to win those football games. And Notre Dame's quarterbacks couldn't counter. And I think that's going to very much be a storyline here. You've got a backup quarterback in Gunnar Stockton who has taken, 80 career snaps, and he's going to be behind a very big physical offensive line that averages 316 pounds. In a game where there's going to be times when Howard Cross at 288 pounds is the biggest defensive player that Notre Dame will have on the field. You know what I mean? Like it's going to be a trench game. It's going to be a trench game. Can Notre Dame's defensive line hold up against Georgia's size? Now, no, this is not a very good rushing team from Georgia. It's not. This is a team that rushed for 129 yards a game. But if you followed the season, you'll know that they went through some of the struggles that Notre Dame did early in the season, and that they were not able to get consistency up front because they couldn't get the left tackle figured out. Their starting center missed some time. Drew Bobo had to step in for Wilson there. The Tate Ratledge was banged up for part of the year. This was an offensive line that went through some of the struggles that Notre Dame did, and they weren't able to kind of get rolling like Notre Dame did, but now they've had 3 weeks off to kind of rest their players and get ready for this game and try to go out there and run the football. And now they're going to have a quarterback that like Kirby Smart says something like, hey, Carson Beck's a pretty good athlete too. Yeah, he is, but he's not the runner that Gunnar Stockton is. Gunnar Stockton is a 6'1", 215-pound bowling ball as a runner. And he's a kid that rushed for, I think, a couple thousand yards in high school. He was a very prolific, 4,000 yards in high school, very prolific player in high school. Top No, he doesn't have experience, but this is a kid that you're not putting Pat Dillingham in the game. It's like Carson Beck goes out and you got to put in Pat Dillingham or Nate Montana or, a player like that. You're putting in a kid that was always going to have a chance to eventually be the guy. It's just happening a little bit sooner now. And so this isn't some bum, as we saw in the game. Took them coming out of halftime, took that first drive right down the field and scored a touchdown on Texas. A very good Texas defense. And now he has to face a very good Notre Dame defense. And we're going to find out if he can move the ball. But, so for Notre Dame guys, it's going to be about two things. Number one, on defense, and that's where we'll start. Number one, can you stop the run game? Can you keep Georgia under $150? That to me is the number for me. If you can hold Georgia under $150, you got a shot to win this football game. Well, this is a team that only averages 129. But again, you don't have your best defensive lineman. That's really where this game is at. So let me just go ahead and handle this business here real quick. All right, let's get rid of that nonsense. Handle the line play. You got to hold them under 150. And then the second one is on defense. Can you do enough pre and post snap to cause confusion from Gunnar Stockton without then making yourself vulnerable to big plays? Because that's the double-edged sword when you are disguising coverages and rolling coverages, is sometimes you roll into something that's not what you want to be rolling into, and they've got something called where they're going to put you in a bind. So can you show enough disguising of pressures and coverages and things like that, show like, oh, they're coming. The safeties are down, the linebackers are down. So Gunnar's checking hot route, or throwing quick, and all of a sudden you're smoking and you're dropping 7. And then he step in front of a ball. Can you do things like we have seen them do this all year? They did it to Connor Wegman. They did it to Anthony Calandria. They've done it all year where you think I've got a guy open and all of a sudden a safety kind of comes out of nowhere and steps in front of a pass. That's why Notre Dame leads college football in turnovers forced this season. It's why they're a top 10 team in interceptions. and have been a very disruptive pass defense for the last 2 years now. It's why they were able to slow down C.J. Stroud. It's why they were able to shut down Drake May. It's why they embarrassed Caleb Williams last year, and I still don't know that Caleb Williams has ever recovered from that game last season. And without making yourself vulnerable to the big plays. Those are, to me, going to be the two keys. And of course, the final one is you have to be able to get some level of pressure on Gunnar Stockton. If he's comfortable in the pocket, he will make enough plays to beat you. I think for the Notre Dame defense, those are the keys to having success against Georgia. And for Georgia, it's the opposite. It's run the football, pound Notre Dame into submission, take your play. I think Georgia's going to want to run the ball, screen Notre Dame to death, and take some play action shots down the field. I think that's going to be their game plan, and they've got the speed on the perimeter to have success if Notre Dame plays like they did against USC. Notre Dame's going to have to be disciplined in the secondary and coverage, but also getting pressure. So protect the quarterback, establish the run, and protect the football. Those are the keys for Georgia in this football game from an offensive standpoint.
Trevor, what do you got, brother?
Yeah, man. I mean, I'm in the same boat, Brian. I agree with you. I mean, all those keys. So I don't want to rehash them. The only other thing that I'll add is Notre Dame's defense is going to have to be really fundamentally sound in open field tackling. They're going to do everything that they can to get their players into space. And with Trevor Etienne back healthy because he missed some time with a rib injury, he's a hard runner to bring down. Like, he's not big. I think he's 5'9", right? But he's a really strong runner. He's he's like a stocky guy. You know, he's tough to bring down. And he's more dynamic in the pass game than what Nate Frazier is. And then they also have Dominic Lovett on the outside. He's kind of like their screen guy. He's the guy that they need to get the ball into his hands right away. Arian Smith leads the team in yards, but Dominic Lovett leads the team in receptions. Those two, combined with Dylan Bell, are their threats on the outside. And Arian Smith can absolutely fly.
Yeah.
So that's going to be interesting to see if they can keep everything in front of them without sacrificing being able to stop the run. That, to me, to what Brian said, is going to be a huge key, because that's where it will start to go south. That's where it starts to go south with Notre Dame, is if Georgia is able to start getting those 4 yards, 5 yards, 6 yards. So it's going to be interesting to see if they're going to be able to do that. Yep, exactly.
Over the top.
The only other one that I'm going to add in there is I think the tight ends for Georgia are going to be a difference maker in their offense.
One way or the other.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Lawson Lucky and Oscar Delp are two dynamic tight ends, and I think they're one of the better tight end duos in the country.
And Ben Urasek starting for a lot of teams.
Mm-hmm.
He's their number 3. I mean, Ben Urasek, their number 3 tight end, caught a 49-yard touchdown pass against Notre Dame in 2021.
Yeah.
Remember that? Caught an in-cut, actually beat Xavier Watts. It was one of his first games playing DB. But, yeah, I love that observation, Trev, because go back and watch the second half of the Tennessee game.
Mm-hmm.
What was it that broke that game open? They couldn't cover the tight ends.
Yep.
Had a great game plan for the tight ends in the second half, Trev. You're spot on that.
Yeah, Oscar Delp went off against the Vols. So I think he had 4 for 52 and 2 touchdowns. So
I think all of that was in the second half as well.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So it's going to be interesting to see what they're going to be able to do there, because Notre Dame's linebackers have shown issues at times in coverage. The good is really good. The bad is kind of glaring. And as the season has progressed, they've kind of shorn a lot of that stuff up, but they also haven't played a Georgia caliber type of tight end room. So for Notre Dame's defense, those are the keys for me, is always identify where 7 and 4 are in the tight end room and tackle well in space, because that's going to be huge. Don Schuler is going to be flying down to blow up screen plays in the alley, and he's going to have to bring his feet with him and not come in out of control. So those are my keys on top of what Brian had mentioned.
All right, boys, that's going to do it for our breakdown of the Sugar Bowl, and frankly, our breakdown for all 4 bowl games. But, stick around, because we're going to have all kinds of coverage, obviously, specifically of the Sugar Bowl coming up, the games in a few different days. And we're going to have post-game coverage of all 4 games. We'll wrap that up, as well as our post-game show after the Sugar Bowl is over. And that'll be well into January 2nd, I would imagine, based on the 8:45 start. So
we will be starting on January 2nd.
Yeah, that was kind of my thought.
We will have a post-game show on January 2nd. Yes.
Yeah.
That's right. Yeah. But hey, make sure you stay locked in, everybody, at Irish Breakdown. Of course, jump on the boards.irishbreakdown.com. We do have a super chat from Aiden Benami.
Not really a question, just to thank you. He said, "What's on the map today, fellas?" That was at the beginning of the show. So
gotcha.
We kind of went over all that, but I did want to bring that up and thank you for
Appreciate you, buddy.
my man. Appreciate you very much.
Yep, appreciate you very much. Appreciate that. And like I said, stay locked in, boards@irishbreakdown.com. All kinds of breakdowns are going to be over there. And of course, on irishbreakdown.com as well. All kinds of good stories. Trevor's been putting up some good stuff over there. So make sure you check out irishbreakdown.com. And Brian, he contributes to that.
Well played, Vince. Well played. Well played.
Thank you.
And we got a meeting coming up after the show, by the way. Just want to talk.
Vince, if you can hang back after the show.
No, Trevor's been killing it this last week, guys. A lot of great content. Breaking the game down.
Just hang back after the show's over. Yeah, sure, no problem. So hit that like button, hit that subscribe button, hit that notification bell, share with your family and friends. And like I said, jump on the boards@irishbreakdown.com. There's some practice notes on there. We did have a practice this morning for Notre Dame. And so you want to check that out. Got to get on the boards@irishbreakdown.com. So that's going to do it for our countdown to kickoff for this round of the college football playoff. We will be back to wrap everything up once all those games are played. So if you are watching on the CFB Nation channel, make sure you hit that like button, subscribe to that one, hit that notification bell. We're going to be moving forward on that channel here in the very, very close future. So make sure you guys get on board with the CFB Nation channel. There's going to be a lot of good stuff happening over there. So, and of course, subscribe and hit the notification bell on the Irish Breakdown channel as well. So for Trevor, for Brian, I'm Vince, and we will talk to you next time on the Irish Breakdown podcast. Have a wonderful rest of your Saturday.